The Great Hall of the Valkyrie Royal Palace had never been so quiet. Hundreds of aliens stood in long rows on both sides of the Golden Corridor. They had tall bodies, silver skin, and eyes that glowed faintly like distant stars. Their robes were made of fabric that shifted color with every small movement. They were proud people, ancient people. They had ruled 40 star systems for over 3,000 years, and they knew it. They were waiting to see the human. The massive doors at the far end of the hall opened slowly. Two Valkyrie guards walked in first, each one nearly 8 feet tall, holding long ceremonial spears. Then between them walked a man. He was not very tall. He was not very broad. He wore a plain dark uniform with a single silver pin on his chest, the symbol of the Earth Military Engineering Corps. His boots were clean but old. His hair was short and brown. His face was calm. Not nervous, not excited, just calm. His name was Ethan Voss. He was 34 years old. He had spent 12 years in the Earth military fixing things. Ships, weapon systems, power reactors, anything that was broken. He was very good at his job. And now, because of a peace treaty between humanity and the Valkyrie Dominion, he was here. He was going to be the Queen's mate. The moment the court saw him, the silence broke. Not into cheering, into laughter. It started small, a low sound from the back of the hall. And then it spread like a wave. Valkyrie nobles leaned toward each other and whispered. Some covered their mouths with long fingers. Others did not bother to hide their smiles at all. An older noble near the front of the crowd shook his head slowly, as if he had just seen something very sad. Ethan kept walking. He did not look left or right. He did not speed up or slow down. He walked at the same steady pace all the way to the center of the hall, stopped and stood still. He put his hands loosely behind his back. He waited. At the far end of the hall, on a raised platform of dark stone, sat Queen Varith Solen. She was stunning. Even by Valkyrie standards, she was considered extraordinary. Her silver skin had a faint blue undertone. Her eyes were a deep, burning gold. She wore a crown that looked like frozen lightning, all sharp angles and sharp light. She sat completely still, watching Ethan walk toward her, and her expression gave nothing away. She had not wanted this arrangement. The treaty had been her council's idea. Humanity had surprised everyone in the last 20 years. Faster than expected technological growth, unexpected military wins in 3 border conflicts, and a stubbornness in negotiations that the Valkyrie found almost irritating. A symbolic bond was suggested, a human representative bound to the Queen as a royal consort, a gesture that would show both sides were serious about peace. Varith had agreed because it was politically smart. She expected them to send someone important, a general, a senator, a man of rank and standing. They sent a repairman. She had read his file. 12 years of engineering service. Expert in structural systems, power grids, and weapons maintenance. No royal blood, no political title, not even a very high military rank. He had retired from active service 8 months ago and had been working at a shipyard on Earth's moon when the treaty office contacted him. She still did not fully understand why they had chosen him. High Arbiter Zorak had no such confusion. He stepped forward from the left side of the hall before Ethan had even reached the platform. Zorak was tall even for a Valkyrie, with narrow golden eyes and a voice like cold stone. He was the second most powerful person in the Dominion, and he had made it very clear, in private, that he thought this alliance with humans was a humiliation. So, Zorak said loudly, so the whole hall could hear, humanity sends us a maintenance worker. He paused and looked at Ethan with something close to pity. Did they not have anyone else? A farmer, perhaps? A street cleaner? More laughter from the court. Ethan looked at Zorak. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said in a very even voice, I fix things that are broken. I was told this alliance needed fixing. It seemed like a good fit. The laughter stopped. Zorak stared at him. The words were simple, almost too simple. There was no anger in them, no attempt at cleverness, just a flat, honest answer. Zorak did not know what to do with that, so he simply turned away and went back to his place in the crowd. Queen Varith watched the small exchange from her throne. Her expression still did not change, but behind her golden eyes, something shifted, just slightly. She welcomed Ethan into the palace with formal words and cold politeness. He was given rooms in the East Wing. Not the best rooms, but not the worst either. He was given access to common areas of the palace, a small staff of 2 attendants, and a schedule of events he was expected to attend. He thanked the attendant who explained all of this to him, and asked 2 short questions about the palace's power systems, which confused the attendant greatly, and then went to his room. Over the next several days, the palace court watched him with a mixture of boredom and mild curiosity. He attended the dinners he was supposed to attend. He was quiet at the table. He listened more than he spoke. When someone spoke to him directly, he answered clearly and without showing off. When someone was rude to him, which happened often, he did not get angry. He simply nodded and moved on. He also walked around the palace, a lot, not in a lost or wandering way. He walked with purpose, hands behind his back, eyes moving slowly over walls, ceilings, floors. He would stop sometimes and look at a wall panel or a junction box for a long moment. Sometimes he wrote small notes on a personal data pad he kept in his front pocket. Nobody thought much of it. He was a repairman. Maybe old habits were hard to break. It was a little strange, and yes, but mostly it was just boring. The court lost interest in him quickly. There was no drama, no outbursts, no embarrassing moments they could gossip about. He was just there, quiet and unremarkable, like a piece of furniture that didn't quite match the room. Only Queen Varith kept watching him. She could not fully explain why. There was nothing exciting about him on the surface. But late one evening, she saw him standing alone in the corridor outside the palace's main power relay room. He was not trying to get inside. He was just standing there looking at the sealed door with that same calm expression on his face. His lips moved very slightly like he was doing math in his head. Then he wrote something on his data pad, put it back in his pocket and walked away. Varith stood in the shadow of the upper balcony and watched him go. A maintenance worker, she told herself. That is all he is. But the thought did not fully settle. It sat uneasily in her mind. It like a small stone inside a boot. Not painful, just there. A reminder that something was slightly off. She did not yet know what. 3 weeks passed. The palace had settled into a routine. The court had their dinners, their political meetings, their long ceremonies full of old words and slow music. Ethan attended what he was required to attend. He sat where he was told to sit. He dressed in the formal dark uniform the palace tailor had made for him. He was polite and quiet and completely unremarkable. The whispering about him had mostly stopped. There was nothing interesting to whisper about, but the tension in the palace had grown, and it had nothing to do with Ethan. High Arbiter Zorak had been meeting privately with the noble houses for days. Small groups, closed doors, conversations that stopped the moment a palace servant walked too close. Queen Varith's intelligence officers had picked up small pieces of information. A name here, a location there, but not enough to form a full picture. What they did know was this. Zorak was unhappy. He had been unhappy for a long time. And unhappy, powerful men in royal courts had a way of doing dangerous things. The first serious sign of trouble came on a Tuesday evening. Queen Varith was walking back to her private chambers after a late council session. 2 of her personal guards were with her. They turned a corner in the eastern corridor and one of the guards suddenly grabbed her arm and pulled her backward. A fraction of a second later, a thin beam of blue light cut through the air exactly where she had been standing. It hit the stone wall and left a deep black burn mark. The guards locked down the corridor immediately. The attacker, a Valkyrie male in a servant's uniform, was caught within minutes trying to escape through a lower door. And he refused to speak. He refused to give a name. But the weapon he carried was not something a servant could buy. It was military grade. It had been recently modified, and its serial number had been removed. The queen was not hurt, but the message was clear to everyone in the palace. Someone wanted her gone. Varith did not sleep that night. She sat in her private study with 3 of her most trusted officers, and they talked for hours. They had suspects. Zorak was the obvious one. But obvious was not the same as proven. Without proof, she could not move against the second most powerful man in the Dominion. If she acted too soon and was wrong, she would lose the noble houses entirely. If she waited too long, the next attempt might succeed. She was still in her study at 4 in the morning when there was a quiet knock at the door. She told her guard to open it. Ethan Voss stood in the doorway. He was dressed simply. No formal uniform. Us just plain clothes. He was holding his datapad in one hand and a small cup of what appeared to be coffee in the other. He looked at the 3 officers in the room, then at the Queen. "I heard what happened," he said. "I thought you might be awake." One of the officers stepped forward to tell him to leave. Verith raised her hand to stop him. "Come in," she said. She did not fully know why she said it. Ethan walked in and sat down at the edge of the table, not at the head, and not trying to take any important position, just at the nearest open seat. He set down his coffee and placed his datapad on the table in front of her. "I've been looking at the palace system since I arrived," he said simply. "Power routing, structural access points, communication relays. I know how this building works now, pretty well." Verith looked at the datapad. On the screen was a detailed map of the palace, more detailed than any map her own staff used. It showed power lines running beneath the floors, ventilation tunnels that doubled as movement corridors, and communication nodes with small red marks on several of them. "Those red marks," she said. "What are they?" "Taps," Ethan said. "Someone has placed listening devices on 6 of your internal communication lines. Not outside lines. Internal ones. The kind used for guard rotations and private council schedules." He paused. "Whoever planned tonight's attack knew exactly when you would be in that corridor and exactly which guards would be with you." The room went very still. One of the officers leaned forward and looked at the screen. His face tightened. "How long have those been there?" "The oldest one is about 11 days old," Ethan said. "The newest was placed 4 days ago." Verith stared at him. "You found these on your own? Without being asked?" "I noticed some irregular power draws in the communication lines during one of my walks," he said. "Small ones. The kind most monitoring systems don't flag because they're within normal range. But they're not normal. I traced them back to the source." He picked up his coffee and took a quiet sip. "I wasn't sure if I should say anything at first. I didn't want to overstep. But after tonight, I thought it was better to speak." Vera sat back in her chair and looked at him for a long moment. She thought about all the times she had seen him walking the palace corridors slowly, looking at walls and ceilings, writing on his datapad. She had thought it was just an odd habit, a man out of place looking for something familiar to focus on. She had not, even once, considered that he was working. "Is there anything else on that datapad?" she asked. Ethan turned it over in his hands for a moment. Then he placed it flat on the table and slid it toward her. "Yes," he said, "but I think you should look at it privately first. Some of it involves people in your court. I don't know who you trust in this room." The 3 officers exchanged looks. It was not an accusation. His voice was perfectly flat when he said it. It was just a fact, stated plainly, the way an engineer might note that a bridge had a crack in it. Not trying to cause fear. Not just being accurate. Verith picked up the datapad. She read for 11 minutes without speaking. The room was completely silent, except for the faint hum of the palace's power systems running through the walls. As she read, the expression on her face shifted, slowly, almost invisibly, the way ice changes just before it begins to crack. When she finished, she set the pad down carefully. "How long have you been building this?" she asked. "Since the 3rd day I was here," Ethan said. "Till why?" He looked at her directly. His eyes were very steady. "Because I was sent here to help keep this alliance together. And I can't do that if you're dead." Verith said nothing for a moment. Then she asked quietly, the question that had been sitting at the back of her mind since the first night she had watched him stand outside the power relay room. "Who are you, really?" Ethan picked up his coffee again. "I'm exactly what they told you I was," he said. "Wish I fixed things that are broken." He glanced at the burn mark description in the report on her desk. "And right now, quite a few things here are broken." He stood up, straightened his plain shirt, and looked at her one last time. "Get some sleep if you can," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Then he walked out of the room and quietly closed the door behind him. Verith looked at the empty doorway for a long time after he was gone. For the first time since he had arrived, she did not think of him as an ornament. She did not think of him as a joke. She did not think of him as the human the court laughed at in the Great Hall. She thought of him as something she had never expected him to be. A serious man, doing a serious job, in complete silence. And that, she realized slowly, was the most dangerous kind of person in any royal court. The next morning came fast and it came hard. At sunrise, High Arbiter Zorak called a formal gathering of the noble houses. Well, it was not a request. It was the kind of summons that carried weight, the kind that, if ignored, meant a political war had already begun. Every noble family with a seat in the Dominion Council showed up within 2 hours. They filled the great council chamber, a wide and cold room with tall black walls and a ceiling so high that the top of it disappeared into shadow. Queen Verith arrived last, as was her right. She walked in alone without her usual line of attendants, went and took her seat at the head of the long table. She looked calm. She had not slept, but she looked completely calm. Ethan sat in a chair along the far wall, behind her and to the right. He was not at the table. Consorts did not sit at the council table. He was in the observers section, the place where palace staff and non-voting members sat during formal sessions. He had his data pad on his knee. His eyes moved slowly around the room. Zorak stood at the center of the table, and he was wearing his full ceremonial robes, deep red and gold, the colors of old Valkyrie authority. He had dressed for a performance. "Last night," he began, his voice filling the room easily, "there was an incident in the east corridor of this palace. The queen was nearly harmed." He paused to let the room react. There were murmurs, concerned looks. "This is deeply troubling to all of us. But what is more troubling, what I believe this council must now address, is the question of why this palace has become so vulnerable." Verith said nothing. She watched him. "The answer," Zorak continued, turning slowly so he could look at the full room, "is the treaty. The human alliance has brought instability. It has made the Dominion look weak to our enemies. It has invited internal conflict. And it has placed an outsider, a foreign national with unknown intentions, inside the walls of our royal home." His golden eyes moved briefly to Ethan, then back to the council. "The noble houses are agreed. The treaty must be dissolved. The human must be removed. And Her Majesty must return to governing the Dominion as it was always meant to be governed, by Valkyrie for Valkyrie." He sat down. The room was very quiet. Several nobles nodded slowly. A few looked at the table. A few looked at Verith, waiting. Verith let the silence sit for a moment. Then she said, "Are you finished?" Zorak raised an eyebrow. "Your Majesty, I asked if you were finished," she said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Zorak pressed his lips together and said nothing more. Verith stood up. She reached into the fold of her robe and placed Ethan's data pad flat on the council table. Then she looked around the room at every face. "Last night," she said, "while this council was sleeping, a human engineer who has been dismissed, laughed at, and ignored since the day he arrived, was awake. He was working. He had been working since his 3rd day in this palace." She tapped the data pad. "On this device is a complete map of 6 illegal listening devices placed on my internal communication lines. Devices that gave someone in this building precise knowledge of my guard rotation last night. Are precise enough to plan an assassination attempt." The murmuring in the room changed in tone immediately. "He also found this," Verith continued. She pressed a key on the data pad and a second file opened. A detailed record of communication signals traced to a private terminal in the palace's North Administrative Wing. A terminal registered to a staff member who reported directly to High Arbiter Zorak. The room went cold. Zorak's expression did not break completely, but something moved behind his eyes. Something quick and sharp, like a man who has just realized the ground under his feet is not solid. "That is a fabrication," he said immediately. "The human made it. It cannot be trusted." "The raw signal logs are included," Verith said. "Time-stamped, unedited. Our own palace technical team can verify them." She paused. "And they will." Zorak stood up. His voice came out harder now. The performance gone. Something uglier underneath. "You would take the word of a human over the word of the second authority of this dominion? This is exactly the problem. This alliance has clouded your judgment. You are letting a foreigner run intelligence operations inside your own palace." He was not running an intelligence operation, Vareth said clearly. He was fixing a problem. That is what he does. She looked at Ethan briefly. He was sitting in his chair along the wall, data pad on his knee, completely still. He did not look proud. He did not look like a man waiting for praise. He looked like a man who had finished one task and was already thinking about the next one. Zorak followed her gaze. He stared at Ethan for a long moment with an expression that was no longer dismissive. It was something different now. It was the look of a man reassessing a threat he had not taken seriously. This changes nothing, Zorak said, turning back to the council. The noble houses have made their position clear. Dissolve the treaty, remove the human, or face the consequences of this council's formal opposition. He walked out of the chamber. 4 other nobles stood and followed him. The rest stayed seated. After the session ended, Vareth walked out through a side door. Ethan followed, a few steps behind, as was expected of a consort in a formal setting. When they reached a private corridor away from the council chamber, Vareth slowed her pace and let him come alongside her. He will not stop, she said quietly. No, Ethan agreed. He won't. He has the support of at least 6 noble houses, and Admiral Yisi's fleet division is stationed only 2 systems away. If he calls them in... I know, Ethan said. Vareth looked at him. What do we do? Ethan was quiet for a few seconds. He looked ahead down the corridor, his eyes moving in that slow, steady way they always did, taking things in, measuring, calculating. You don't do anything yet, he said. Not officially, not publicly. Any move you make right now gives him a reason to call in the fleet immediately. He glanced at her. But I need something from you. What? I need you to give me access to the maintenance logs for every ship that has docked at the capital station in the last 4 months, he said. And I need the contracts for the technical service teams that worked on Zorak's ships during that time. Vareth stopped walking. She turned to look at him fully. Why? She asked. Because those ships are his real power, Ethan said. Not the noble houses, not the political speeches, the fleet. Take away the fleet and he has nothing. He paused. I want to look at who serviced those ships, what work was done, what systems were accessed. Vareth studied his face for a long moment. He was not asking for soldiers. He was not asking for weapons or warships or political leverage. He was asking for maintenance logs. You think you can stop his fleet, she said slowly. With maintenance logs. I think I can find out if it's possible, he said, but I need to look first. Vareth held his gaze for another moment. Then she gave a single, small nod. I'll have them sent to your room within the hour, she said. Ethan nodded. He started to turn away, then stopped. One more thing, he said. Those service teams, some of them are still in the capital. They haven't left yet. I'd like to keep it that way quietly, without drawing attention. Consider it done, Vareth said. He turned and walked back down the corridor. She watched him go. The plain uniform, the steady walk, the data pad already in his hand before he had even turned the corner. She thought about what Zorak had said, that the human had clouded her judgment, that she was making a mistake trusting a foreigner. She looked at the empty corridor where Ethan had just been standing. No, she thought. For the first time in weeks, her judgment felt very clear indeed. The maintenance logs arrived at Ethan's room in less than an hour. There were thousands of them. 4 months of service records from every ship that had docked at the capital station, repair orders, parts replacements, systems checks, crew manifests, access logs for every technical team that had boarded each vessel. It was a mountain of dry, boring data, the kind of information that made most people's eyes glaze over within minutes. Ethan sat down at his small desk, opened the first file, and started reading. He did not stop for 6 hours. He drank 2 cups of coffee. He did not eat. He did not look up from the screen except to write short notes on a separate pad beside him. His room was completely silent except for the quiet sound of him turning pages and the faint hum of the palace walls around him. What he was looking for was not obvious. It never was. It was the kind of thing that hid inside normal, sheer routine information, a small irregularity, a pattern that almost made sense but not quite, a number that was just slightly wrong. Most people would never notice it, but Ethan had spent 12 years reading exactly this kind of data, and his brain had been trained to catch the things that did not fit. He found the first one at the 3-hour mark. A service team had boarded one of Zorak's heavy warships, the carrier-class vessel called the Dominion Fist, 6 weeks ago. And the work order listed a routine propulsion check and a coolant line replacement. Standard work. Nothing unusual. But the access log showed that the team had also entered the ship's weapons control bay for 47 minutes. The work order did not mention the weapons control bay at all. Ethan wrote it down. He kept reading. By the time he finished, he had found 11 similar entries across 5 different ships in Zorak's fleet division. Each service team's entering areas that their work orders did not list. Short visits, quiet, the kind of thing that a routine audit would almost certainly miss because everything else on the page looked completely normal. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he pulled up the crew manifests for those service teams and cross-referenced them with the Capital Station's personnel registry. It took him another 40 minutes. When he was done, he had a list of 9 names. Technicians who had been present on multiple ships across multiple visits. Their registry profiles listed them as independent contractors, no permanent employer, paid per job. Ethan opened a separate search and ran their identification numbers against Earth's military personnel database, a database he still had access to through his old engineering corps credentials, which no one in the palace had thought to revoke. 6 of the 9 names came back as active or recently retired members of Earth's Deep Space Engineering Division. Ethan stared at that result for a long moment. Then very slowly he smiled. He had not brought those people here. He had not called them, had not arranged their contracts, had not coordinated anything with them. But he knew immediately what had happened. When the treaty office had selected him for this assignment, someone back home, someone careful and quiet, and the same kind of person Ethan was, had made sure the Capital Station's service roster was quietly filled with the right people. Just in case, humanity had not sent one engineer to this palace, they had sent a network. Ethan picked up his personal communicator and sent 6 short messages. No explanations, no long instructions, just a time, a location inside the Capital Station, and 4 words, "It is time. Confirm." All 6 replied within 20 minutes, with 1 word each, "Confirmed." He stood up, stretched his back, and went to find Queen Vareth. He told her what he had found. He showed her the access log irregularities, the names, the cross-references. He explained in plain and simple language what he believed those technicians had done during their unauthorized visits to Zorak's ships. He told her what he now believed was possible. Vareth listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Shevin, you are telling me," she said carefully, "that your people placed individuals inside the Capital Station's technical workforce before you even arrived here." "I believe so, yes," Ethan said, "without telling you." "Without telling me," he confirmed. "I think the idea was that if things went wrong, the option would be there. It just needed someone to recognize it and use it." Vareth looked at him. "And now you are going to use it." "With your permission," he said. She studied his face, and there was no arrogance in it, no excitement. He looked like a man who had found a useful tool in a drawer and was asking if he could pick it up. "What exactly will they do?" she asked. "Zorak's fleet strength comes from 5 ships," Ethan said. "The modifications those technicians made during their visits, if my reading of the access logs is correct, mean that those ships can now be remotely accessed through a back channel built into their repair systems. Nothing visible from the inside. Nothing that would show on any standard diagnostic check." He paused. "Given 72 hours and full cooperation from those 6 people, I believe we can make all 5 of those ships completely unable to function. No engines, no weapons, no communications. They will float in space like very expensive rocks." Vareth stood up from her chair and walked slowly to the window. She looked out over the capital city, the towers, the lights, the millions of people living their lives below, none of them knowing what was happening inside this palace. "If you do this," she said quietly, "Zorak loses his ability to threaten me with military force. He loses the fleet. Without the fleet, the noble houses who follow him have no real power. They are politicians without soldiers." "Yes," Ethan said. "And if something goes wrong, if he launches before you are finished?" "Then we have a problem," Ethan said honestly. But right now his ships are docked, and his crew rotation is in its rest cycle. We have a window. It will not stay open forever. Vareth turned from the window. She looked at Ethan for a long time. At his plain uniform, his calm eyes, his datapad held loosely in one hand. She thought about the day he had walked into the Great Hall, and the whole court had laughed. She thought about how small and unremarkable he had seemed. She thought about how completely wrong they had all been. 72 hours, she said. Yes, Ethan said. You have them, she said. Do what you need to do. Ethan nodded once. He turned toward the door, then stopped and looked back at her. Stay visible, he said. Keep your schedule. Attend your dinners. Act like nothing is happening. The moment Zorak thinks you are preparing for something, the window closes. Vareth raised an eyebrow slightly. You are giving me instructions now. Friendly advice, he said. There was a pause. And then, for the first time since he had arrived, Queen Vareth Solen almost smiled. Go, she said. He went. Over the next 72 hours, nothing looked different in the palace. Vareth attended her dinners. She sat through her meetings. She smiled at the right times and said the appropriate words and gave no sign whatsoever that anything unusual was happening. Meanwhile, 6 quiet engineers in the capital station worked through the night and the night after that. And they did not rush. They did not make noise. They simply did their jobs, the way engineers do, carefully, methodically, and completely invisibly. Zorak dined well. He slept soundly. He met with his noble allies and told them the Queen would break within the week. He had absolutely no idea that his entire fleet was being taken apart from the inside, one silent system at a time. On the morning of the 3rd day, Ethan sent Vareth a single message. Weket said Orn. It is done. She read it at her breakfast table, alone with a cup of warm tea in her hand. She set the cup down slowly. She sat still for a moment. Then she straightened her back, finished her tea, and went to get dressed for the most important day of her reign. Zorak made his move at noon. He had clearly decided he had waited long enough. When he walked into the palace's main communications hall with 4 of his noble allies behind him and demanded a galaxy-wide broadcast channel, the same official channel used for royal announcements and Dominion-wide addresses. It was a bold move. Using that channel meant whatever he said would be heard across every Valkyrie system simultaneously. He intended to publicly call for the Queen's removal, announce the dissolution of the Human Treaty, and declare a formal vote of no confidence in her reign, all before she had any time to respond. What he did not know was that Vareth was already in the communications hall when he arrived. She was standing at the broadcast console, composed and still, dressed in her full royal ceremonial robes, the deep blue and silver ones reserved for the most serious occasions. Her crown sat perfectly on her head. Her golden eyes were calm. Zorak stopped in the doorway when he saw her. Just for a second. Then he walked forward. Your Majesty, he said. His voice was controlled, but there was an edge underneath it. I am claiming broadcast rights under Article 9 of the Noble Council Charter. I suggest you step aside. I know what you are claiming, Vareth said, and I suggest you wait. I have waited long enough. 30 seconds, Zorak, she said quietly. Wait 30 seconds. Something in her voice made him stop. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was complete and total certainty, the kind of stillness that comes from a person who already knows how the next hour ends. Zorak looked at her face. Then he looked around the room. His eyes found Ethan, who was standing near the back wall in his plain uniform, datapad in hand, watching everything with his usual calm expression. Zorak's jaw tightened. Vareth turned to the broadcast console and opened the galaxy-wide channel herself. People of the Valkyrie Dominion, she said clearly, and her voice going out across 40 star systems in an instant. I am speaking to you today because there are things you deserve to know about the strength of this dominion, about the nature of our alliance with humanity, and about what loyalty and intelligence truly look like. She pressed a second key. Every screen in the communications hall filled with data, the listening device records, the assassination attempt logs, the communication traces leading back to Zorak's terminal, and finally a complete technical report of everything the 6 human engineers had done over the past 72 hours. Every ship, every system, every quiet and precise modification that had been made without a single weapon being fired. Then she did what Ethan had done in the council chamber. She let the silence sit. Across the Dominion, people were reading. Officers on military stations, nobles in their private homes, citizens in public squares watching the broadcast screens mounted on city walls. All of them reading the same documents. All of them understanding slowly, and then all at once what had happened. Zorak stared at the screens. His face had gone very still. "That data is false," he said, but his voice had lost something. The edge was gone. What was left was thinner and less certain. "Admiral Issa," Vareth said calmly. Addressing the screen directly, she knew Issa would be watching from his command ship 2 systems away. "Please confirm the current status of your fleet." There was a pause of about 10 seconds. Then Admiral Issa's voice came through the broadcast channel, tight and clipped and deeply unhappy. 5 vessels are reporting total systems failure. Engines, weapons, and communications are offline on all 5. Engineering teams are unable to identify the cause. The communications hall was absolutely silent. Zorak turned to look at Ethan. He stared at him for a long moment. This plain, quiet, unremarkable human standing near the back wall with a datapad in his hand. This man the court had laughed at. This man nobody had bothered to watch. When Zorak finally spoke, his voice was very low. "How?" Ethan looked at him. He took a small breath. The way a person does when they are about to explain something simple to someone who should have understood it a long time ago. "You saw me arrive and you counted what I wasn't," Ethan said. "I wasn't tall. I wasn't royal. I wasn't a soldier or a general or a politician. I didn't have a title or a bloodline or 1,000 years of empire behind me." He paused. "So you stopped looking. You decided I wasn't a threat because I didn't look like the threats you already knew." He held Zorak's gaze. "That's the mistake. Humans are almost never the strongest or the fastest or the oldest in any room. So we do something else instead. We learn how the room works. We learn it better than anyone. And then we wait for the moment it matters." Zorak said nothing. "Your fleet isn't destroyed," Ethan said. "It can be repaired. That was a choice. We could have done this differently." He glanced briefly at Vareth, then back. "But this way, nobody died. I prefer it that way." 2 palace guards stepped forward and took Zorak by the arms. He did not fight. The fight had gone out of him completely. Not because of the guards, but because of the screens still displaying the full documentation of his failure for every citizen in the Dominion to see. There was nothing left to fight with. He was taken out of the room, his noble allies left quietly, quickly, without making eye contact with anyone. The broadcast channel was still open. Vareth turned back to the console. She looked at the screen, at the billions of people across 40 star systems watching and listening. And she said the words that she had not planned to say, the words that came up from somewhere honest and unscripted. "The human consort you were told to laugh at," she said, "has done more for the safety and stability of this Dominion in 3 weeks than most of this court has managed in years. Remember that." She closed the channel. The hall was empty now except for the 2 of them. Vareth walked toward Ethan slowly. He stood where he was, datapad at his side, watching her approach. When she stopped in front of him, she was close enough that she had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Vareth did something that no Valkyrie queen had done in over 400 years. She reached out and placed her hand over his, not as a formal gesture, not as a ceremonial act, but simply and honestly, the way one person reaches for another when words are not quite enough. "Thank you," she said. Just that. 2 quiet words. Ethan looked down at her hand on his, then he looked back up at her face, at her golden eyes, which were not cold anymore, and had not been cold for some time now. "You're welcome," he said. Outside the palace, across 40 star systems, the news was already spreading. 17 civilizations who had been watching the Valkyrie Dominion from a careful distance began sending messages to the human embassy before the hour was out. Some asking questions, some requesting meetings, all of them suddenly very interested in humanity in a way they had not been before. That evening, Ethan sat alone in his room. His datapad was open on the desk in front of him. He was looking at the star charts of the 2 systems that sat just beyond the Dominion's eastern border, and he was making small notes in the margins. Quiet ones, careful ones, just in case. Some things never changed, and that, for the rest of the galaxy, was beginning to look less like a comfort and more like a warning.